Hi, everyone. Thanks for signing up and showing up to our first of three in our UI UX design with Figma series. My name's Sean. I'm the manager here at the Digital Lounge, and I will be your instructor for the next 3 weeks. So just some questions to kind of get a sense of where we're all at. Has anyone here used Figma at all before? No, awesome. In the perfect place for that. And then two, has anyone used like a different design program like Photoshop or Canva or Illustrator or stuff like that? Or a little bit. Yeah, cool. It's a little bit different, Figma, because it's a little bit more tailored for like websites and apps and stuff like that. But if you have some experience, you'll pick up on some things pretty quickly. Cool. So let's go through our roadmap for the next 3 weeks. So today we're starting with our intro and design basics. This is just going to be how do we set up a Figma account. As university students, you get the professional version for free, and I'll show you how to do that. And we'll build a very simple design in Figma using some layout stuff, doing colors and fonts and all of that fun stuff with the design. Next week, we'll do intermediate design techniques. So it's going to be a little bit more advanced, building on what we learned today. This is going to be stuff like components and auto layout and masking, all of words which might mean nothing to you, but you will come to know and love. It'll make your designs look better and also speed up your design workflows. And then in 2 weeks' time, we'll do our animation and our prototyping one. This is where we're going to make our designs come to life, adding some motion and interactivity, where if you click the About Me page button, it takes you to an About Me page and stuff like that. Cool. Awesome. So let's get started. Let's first set up our Figma accounts as you do get that professional version for free. So let me just get out of here, if I can get out of here. There we go. So let's go to figma.com. Just open any browser tab. And then once you're here at figma.com, you'll click on this pricing tab right up here in the top toolbar. Once you're there, you'll see all of these different plans. Figma does this kind of the same way as Canva does it, as WordPress, where you can start a free account, but then you can pay for more features and stuff like that. Under this professional team card, it's a little hidden, but there's this free for students and educators. It doesn't look like a link. I don't know if they're trying to dissuade you from actually doing it. But if you click on that link right there, it'll take you to this new page where it says this free best-in-class tools for the classroom and this Get Verified button. When you click the Get Verified button, you'll be taken to a new page where you input your email. Make sure to input your USC email because it's saying at usc.edu. Basically, Figma will be like, hey, you're a student. You have an active university email and gives it to you for free. After you click continue with email, it'll prompt you to do a password. I can't do this because I've already done this like 3 years ago. But you'll put in your password that you want to do for your create your account, and there'll be the typical kind of account creation stuff, entering some information in, you'll get an email verification and stuff like that. As you all are doing that, I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of these kind of UI UX design roles that you might see as you're looking for jobs or internships or stuff like that. Just to also see if this is anything that you want to do with your career. So a UX designer is kind of that catch-all. It's the standard title. It kind of does everything. And so this person will be there when the user starts complaining about something, says that something's not intuitive or doesn't look great. And they're doing different ideations. They're making prototypes and mock-ups. They're testing those with users. They're kind of there from the whole process from start to finish. And then a more specific one is the UI designer. So where UX stands for user experience, it encompasses everything. UI stands for user interface, and it is strictly limited to the visuals. So in organizations that are a lot bigger, they might have a special UI designer role whose only focus is on the actual designing of the screens, basically. Then we have the product designer role. This is basically the same as that UX designer role, but you add a layer of business strategy on it. So you're in charge of this product, you're making this product roadmap and seeing like these different stages And so it's just basically a UX designer with some business responsibilities. Then we have our UX researcher role. This person is basically our user advocate. They're talking with users through interviews or surveys, figuring out what they like about a certain feature or software, what they don't, and then kind of passing that along and incorporating all of that feedback into the design process. They probably will also be involved at some level with usability testing, which is when you've made your prototype, you've made a mock-up, and you give it to a user to try to complete some workflows to see if what you designed actually meets their goal. Then we have that UX engineer role. This is that kind of bridging the gap between the creative designers and the technical developers. So if you're interested in designing something visually in Figma and then implementing it using like web technology code or app development code, that's where the UX engineer comes into play. They're people who are creative and also coders, basically. And then we have a UX writer role. They're very lasered in on the words and the messaging that is used throughout the product. So they're doing the button names, is the menu naming intuitive? Is the alert message like not too scary, but scary enough for them to do something? Kind of fun stuff like that. Cool. Your Figma should probably look something like this, but maybe without all of these files because you haven't used it yet. So I just want to go through a little bit of what you will see on this dashboard and why you might want to use it. So on the left side panel over here, you'll see your name in the top left. If you click there, you can change your theme. So if you want to change it from light to dark or just match whatever your system is, you do that here. And you have your typical account settings available here. If you want to change your name, your password, stuff like that, that's all in your settings. And then there's this Git desktop app. So Figma runs both in the browser and as a desktop app as well. They are virtually the same. The only difference is that the browser one, you need internet access, where the desktop one, you don't. And so it's just kind of, which one do you prefer? I prefer using the browser because then I don't have another application on my computer taking up space, so I can use it for other things. But you can do either one. You'll then see this section of your community profile. The Figma community is essentially just like a free resource where people post design assets, different files that you can copy and play around with and do stuff like that. We'll probably explore that later, either today or next week. Then if you have multiple accounts, this would be a case if like you're a freelancer and there's a bunch of different companies adding you to their plans and stuff like that, you might have several Figma accounts. And this is where you'd switch between those. Other things in this left bar outside of that name menu, you have your search. So if you want to search for any of your files, you can go through here. As you create more and more, you may need to search as you get a ton of things there. And then for the pro version, you'll have this team. The free one, it'll say you have a team too, but it's a little bit different. A team is just a way to organize things in here. Drafts, this is where all of your files live. Projects are a grouping of your files. You can group them however you want. Your trash is when you delete something and it gets saved to the trash for a little bit. This admin menu, this is going to be if you are managing a team and you want to invite other people to be in your team and they also have access to all of your projects and your files, you can do that here. You can also share with people at the project level. So if you want to just create a project and then invite classmates for something, you can do it there instead of them being able to access everything in your team account. And then I have these starred and I'll show you how to start something as well. Basically, it's just a way to bookmark something, favorite it so you can access it easier. Over here in this main one, the top stuff is how you create some files. The design file is going to be your standard Figma file. This is where we're going to be spending pretty much all of our time. FigJam is a browser-based, easy-to-use whiteboarding tool. It's basically like a digital whiteboard that you can like draw and type in and add post-it notes and whatnot. It's good for if you want to do some like kind of quick ideations of stuff and or if you have like project stakeholders who don't know how to use technology. It's super pared down so that they don't get tripped up on stuff. We have Figma Slides over here. It's still in beta and it's basically a PowerPoint clone. So if you want to create presentations in Figma because you like it more than PowerPoint or Canva or whatever, they also now have a thing for you. Probably not applicable to any of us here, but with import, If you did use a different UI UX design tool like Jamboard or Miro or stuff, you can import those files into here and then change them in Figma. But we're learning Figma because it is the most popular one. Down here, when you create files, they'll be in here. You'll also see your projects. You can sort and filter them as you see fit. They're pretty standard sorting and filtering like other things there. Okay, so now let's actually do something. So let's create a project. So under where it says your team, go to all projects. And again, these are going to be groups of files that you put together. I like to create some for like all of our workshops, or if I'm making my portfolio site and stuff like that. Up here, you can click this plus project to add a new one, and then you'll name it. You can name it whatever you want. This will just be for our workshop series, unless if you want it for something else. So I could put 2020, spring 2025 workshops and click continue. The next screen will be, do you want to add people to this project right away? So if you know that you are going to be collaborating with others and files in here, you can add them right now. Otherwise, you can just click create project. I'm not going to create this one because I already have one for myself. Okay, after you've created your project, if you hover over it, you'll see this star icon up in the top right. If you click that to make it filled in yellow, that means that you favorited it and it will appear in your starred list over here. So if I take this off, it gets removed. If I add it, it gets added over here. So double click to go into your project, and this is where we're going to create our file. So if you click create new up here, and you see all of those same options that we had before. So let's click design file, and we are in Figma, believe it or not. It looks like nothing. They recently redesigned it, I think within the past year or two, to like really pare down the UI so that you're more focused on your design than their designing of their own system. But everything is still there. So let's go through what you will see here. So first of all, the center area, this is kind of like your canvas, your kind of place that you're going to be doing all of your work. For like Illustrator users, it's kind of like where all your artboards are. For Photoshop, it's that just kind of area where your photo is and you're doing edits and stuff like that. This is where we're going to be doing most of our work. There is our toolbar down here that has all of our standard tools within Figma. I gotta hide something from Zoom real quick. And with these, if you click on the arrow, there'll be some additional ones that are nested within there. So if I click on the arrow by the frame one, there's some different ones by the pen, there's the pencil, etc. On the right area over here where it says design and prototype, this has some things that we're going to play around with a lot. The first one up here, you'll see your initial. So with Figma, you can have multiple people working on the same document at the same time. If you do have that, you'll see their initial up here as well. And you can select them to go exactly to where they're working and seeing what they're doing and stuff like that. Then we have the design tab. So as we add elements, you will see different settings over here. So if I add a shape, I'll probably see some settings for alignment, the color of the shape, how big it is, other stuff like that. If you add text, you'll see some different ones. Again, the size, you'll see colors and stuff like that. All right. So if you have text and you're selecting the text, the stuff in the design stuff will be more aligned with your text settings than a shape settings if you have shapes. Prototyping, that's where we're going to be doing in week 3. That's adding that interactivity, the connections between different stuff there as well. Over here on our left, this is mostly going to be our organization stuff. So we have our Figma icon right here. This is going to be your standard like file menu, edit menu, object menu, view, stuff like this. I rarely go in here. I've learned the keyboard shortcuts and I'll be teaching you those too, but sometimes we might go in here as well. If you do open it and you need to remember what a keyboard shortcut is, or if I accidentally forget to say the Windows one because I'm using a Mac, it might happen. I'm so sorry. You can open it up here, and when you find it, it'll say your keyboard shortcut to do that thing. Then where it says untitled, this is actually our file name right now. So let's go ahead and change that. So if you double click within Untitled, you'll get this text editor and you can name your file to whatever you want it to be. So I'm going to call this Spring 2025, just because this is the Spring 2025 version and I keep them all in one project. You can name it whatever you would like. And then when you click out, it just gets applied. The really nice thing about Figma is it auto saves, so you don't have to remember to do file save so many times. We have two tabs right here. We have file and we have assets. So file is going to be most of your ways of organizing things. So pages are essentially just different pages of this content in the middle. So if you wanted to have some screens on one page, you can, and then second page, we're probably just going to play around with just one page. But if you're having like a really big design project, you might put stuff on some different ones. A pretty standard one is to have one page that's your actual mock-up. And then there's another page of like things that you thought might work, like ideation stuff, and you're playing around with stuff, but then you just choose not to do. You might have like an archived one or different versions as you update stuff like that. Then there's also layers. Layers should be familiar for those of you who've used like Adobe before. Basically, any frame you add, any text you add, any shape that you add, any image is all added as a layer, and it's just a different type of element that you have on your design. And the order in here will matter. The ones that are higher on the list means that they're higher up in your design, or if they're lower down and they're overlapping, it just determines which one's in front or behind. And we'll see this as it populates and as we play around with it, okay? And last thing before we start some actual design stuff where it gets a little bit more exciting is this Assets tab. So we're going to see this populate more when we create those components and those variants and stuff like that. For now, if you do that, you can see there's libraries. For your team, you can create a library that has like your brand colors, your logo, standard images, stuff like that, that are shared across things. You would see that here if you have created one. I don't have one. They do have some pre-made UI kits also here. I'll show you in the community where those are so that you can kind of play around with those as well. Okay, cool. Now I'll stop yapping and actually we'll start designing. So the basis of Figma is frames. If you're coming from the Illustrator world, it's your equivalent of artboards. It's basically just your container for where all of your stuff is. It's your canvas. It determines the size of your screen. So you can activate your frame tool by either clicking on it right here. It's this one that looks like a square that the lines go across, or you can hit the F key on your keyboard. When you do that, you have two options to create your frame. Actually, three. So if you click and drag, you can create a free form size. Not super standard because you need to design for a certain screen, like a laptop screen or a phone screen, which have specific measurements. And if you're clicking and dragging, there's a good chance you're not going to get it right, especially the ratio between the two. If you have the frame tool selected and you just click, it'll just give you a standard square. But what you really want to be using are these presets over here. So when you have the frame tool activated, you get these presets for your phone, for tablet, for desktop presentations, for an Apple Watch, paper for like printing stuff, some different social media sizes. And so you want to stick with these because they're pretty standard and you know that you're designing for the right size screen and you can know what it's going to look like when it's published. So let's go and add our desktop one. So under the desktop group, there's another one called desktop and just click to add that. And you'll see that our frame will get added here in our little canvas area. And then it's also over here in our layers. And so right now it just says desktop 1. And as you create another one, it's going to say desktop 2. And as you create another one, it's going to say desktop 3, which isn't super organized. So let's pretend that we're making a website right away. So if you want to rename your layer, you can either double click in the layers panel over here. You can also double click on the name that's on the top left. So I'm going to rename mine to home. So I know this is like the home page of my website. Okay, cool. You added your first frame in Figma. Woohoo. So something that's super important when you're designing for different screens is layout, because you're going to have websites that you want to be responsive to it being on a laptop, but it also looks good on a phone and all of that stuff. And so we want to make sure that we can add a layout grid as we start designing so that we're placing things in a uniform manner and they look good and we're not like a couple pixels off and stuff like that. So to do that, make sure you have your frame selected. You can either do this by clicking directly on it over here, the name or the layer, and you'll notice it when the layer is highlighted. And then down over here in the design tab, we have layout grid. And so click the plus button over there. By default, Figma will give you a grid of a bunch of small squares that are 10 pixels wide and 10 pixels tall. I personally hate this. I think it looks horrible and I'm not good at using it. Thankfully, they gave us some other options, but we'll talk about layout first. So you can see down here now that I've added it, I do get some details about it. It just tells me that it is a grid that's 10 pixels. If you ever want to remove it, like it just looks, you're like, I never want to use this again, you can click that minus icon and it'll get rid of it. But what you'll most likely want to do when you click this add is use this eyeball icon, because that just turns the visibility on or off, right? So as you're designing, you might want to lay it out with the grid, and then you turn off the eyeball icon to see how it looks without these annoying red lines everywhere. But then you can turn it back on. So if you click on where it says grid, 10 pixels, we have two different options that we can add instead. So columns or rows. So columns are going to be your rectangles that go up and down. Rows are going to be your rectangles that go left to right. With screens, because I never know, like sometimes when I'm designing how long my website content's going to be or stuff like that, I pretty much stick with columns so that I'm looking at the organization from left to right, essentially. So if you click columns, it switches that horrible pixel grid to a slightly more palatable column setup. By default, with your columns, you will get these 5 stretched out columns that match what your frame size is. Now you can use this, but it is a little bit difficult to use as you want to create some different layouts. And the reason is actually due to a little bit of math. So as you have different pieces of content and you want them to be equal on each side, you want there to be symmetry, you can't really achieve that with 5, right? Because the only way to make it fully symmetrical on each side is to have something that spans the whole distance. Because if you have something that's only 2 columns wide and then 3 columns wide, that's uneven. And you might want that, but if you're looking for symmetry, it's not easy to work with. We do get to customize this, thankfully. So if you click on this layout grid settings button to the left of where it says 5 columns, we get this small little pop-up, and this allows us to change what we get to do. Now, best practice is to pick a number that can be divided by a bunch of other numbers. So 5 is only divisible by 1 and 5. So you can either only have one long one or 5 individual 1 column things. I typically just go all the way to 12 with columns, because what this allows me to do, and you don't have to follow along with this, I'll show you how to do these, is I can create one thing that is 12 columns wide. I can also create 2 things that are 6 columns wide each. I can go even further and do 4 columns with 3. And so you start to get the idea. I can create a bunch of different layouts that are all symmetrical, like so. Make sense? Cool. So let's go back to our layout grid settings. You can change the color. So if you find the red to be particularly annoying, you can change the red to something that maybe is less jarring to the eyes. I typically just keep the red. You can also change the opacity over here where it says 10. That's just basically how either opaque or transparent it is. The lower the number, the more see-through it is. So if I decided to go it to like 1%, it's going to be like barely visible. It's a little bit hard to lay it out when it's like very low, but you can do that. Now you'll see that we have these types as well. So it is stretched by default, which means, hey, we're going to look at how wide your frame is. And you told us 12 columns. So we're just going to put 12 columns in there and determine how wide each column is based on how wide your frame is. You can also change it to left if you want them to start from the left and then you determine what the width is for each one. You can start them from the right. You can start them in the middle. For this one, we're going to keep them at stretch though. That width setting is the one that is unlocked if you choose something else, because then you get to determine how wide they are, right? So if I were to go here and I do it at 60, it makes the columns wider. The other setting you might see is left and right have an offset setting. And this is just basically how far from the left or from the right do you want them to start. So in this case, it's 0 with left. So they're starting at the way left. But if I added like 100 pixels here, it's going to move at 100 pixels away from the left. Okay, let's go back to stretch. And we have two options right here for us. One is going to be our margin, and one is going to be our gutter. So the margin is going to be your distance between the leftmost side of your frame and the leftmost side of the left column, and the distance between the right side of the frame and the rightmost side of your right column. So it's just how far from the sides do you want it to be. Let's change ours to 25, just to kind of give some breathing room on the sides. Our gutter is a very similar setting. This is the distance between each of the individual columns. So if we change that to 25 as well, it'll just make the distance between each column a little bit bigger. Okay. Any questions about the columns and the layout grid and stuff like that? Cool. So I'm going to give you a challenge now. I want you to add another grid layout here. So you can add a second one by just clicking this plus icon again, and it'll add that 10 pixel grid layout. And I'm going to give you some specifications that I would like you to make it. And I will make this bigger, don't worry. So we're going to do rows, and let's make this 100. So I want you to make a rows layout grid. I want it to start from the top. We are going to, let me see what I wrote down. The offset is going to be set to 175. And this is in pixels, by the way. You just don't need to put that marker. I want the count to be set to auto, because that's going to automatically determine how many rows you need. And the height, I want to be 250 pixels, and the gutter at 25 pixels. So that's your challenge. There's a lot of specifications. So add a second layout grid. That's rows. It starts from the top, has an offset of 175, count of auto, your height of 250, and your gutter of 25. So I'm going to go through with how I would do this. So I'm going to turn these both on. So I've added my second layout. I'm going to switch it from grid to rows. I'm going to click on this settings tab to the left. The count, I'm going to switch to auto. So it automatically determines how many rows I need. The type, I'm going to switch to top. So it starts from the top up here. My offset is going to be 175. And that's just going to push them all down by 175 pixels. My height is 250, so to make them a bit thicker. And my gutter is 25, so that there's some more distance between them. So hopefully that was okay. Yeah, does it all look like this? Pretty similar? Awesome. We're going to do another row challenge. And I'll explain after we do this why it looks a little funky. Okay, so we're going to do rows again. We're going to do another one that starts from the top. This time, I only want you to create one row. I want the offset to not be 175. I want it to be 50. I want the height to be 100, and you can leave the gutter at 25. So that's your new challenge. So create another rows layout that starts from the top, 50 pixels of offset, only one of them, 100 pixel height, and a 25 pixel gutter. All right, so let me do this one. So it's the same process. You click add, you change it to rows, you go over here, make it 1. That starts from the top, our height of 100, our offset of 50, and our gutter of 25. So now I can delete all of my text. So hopefully yours looks about the same as mine. And basically, I've just kind of played around with this to make it look like this, with the idea that this thinner one up top is going to be our navigation menu for our website. These bigger ones down here will be where our content is, to kind of like block them out with a little bit more room. But we did leave a little bit of room up here for stuff like this on your screen, where it's like your Chrome settings and your camera and stuff like that. All right, cool. So we're going to learn about styles next because of this. If I zoom out and I add another desktop frame over here, I can't use that same layout grid. And if I'm using multiple pages on a site, I'll probably want them to have a similar layout. And so I would have to go through the process of creating the columns again, the rows, and that other row set that we did as well for every page that you're designing. Obviously not ideal and a big waste of time. And so that's why Figma has what is called styles, which allows you to save a certain group of settings that you can use later on. So let's do that right now. So select your frame again, and over by layout grid, you should see the 3 different type of grid styles that we've included. We have this 4 square, 4 dot menu button that is right by our plus icon. If you click on that, you'll see all of the grid styles that you have created for this project, which in this case is none. So let's make one by clicking this plus button instead. So in that grid styles pop-up, you click here and you can name it to whatever you want it to be. I am just going to put layout. If you're going to have multiple ones, you might want them to be a little bit more descriptive. There is a description pane right here, which allows you to describe what it's used for, especially if you're like starting a file but going to pass it off to someone else and you want to make sure that they know when to use what. If you click on this show more options, you can see those 3 grid styles that we created, and that's just making sure that they're going to be saved within this style ourselves. Super simple. You just click create style now. And so now you'll notice that those 3 went away and then it's applied to this style. So now if I go, and you can follow along with this one, hit F on your keyboard or click the frame tool, click on the desktop again. Let's rename it to About Me. With our new frame selected, go down here to layout grid, but don't click the plus icon because this is going to be if you're adding individual ones. If you click on this apply styles, you will see that layout style that we created before. And so when we click on there, it'll automatically just apply all of the same ones to here. Now, there's a little bit of a note on this. So if I were to go and click outside into this kind of black gray area for me, it might be gray if you're using the light theme. I'll see that under my local styles, grid styles, I have layout. I can click on this like customize button if I want to make edits to this style. So for example, if I turn off my one row, it'll turn off for every single frame that you've applied this style to. So super simple as you're creating stuff that should be shared across your design. That way you don't have to keep changing it on every page or every element. All right. If there's ever a time that you've applied a style and you don't want to, and you want to get rid of it, you want to customize it further, but only for a specific thing, you can go down and select that thing, go down to where you see it and click this unlink button. We're not going to do that for this one. If you want to, you can, but that's just how you detach it so that you can customize it specifically for this one. Okay, they also have some other styles that you can do, and you don't have to create an element first in order to create these styles. So click out here in this kind of empty void space again, and by local styles, you'll see this plus icon. So when you click plus, these are the 4 different types of styles that you can create. So we've already done grid, but you can also do text, colors, and effects. This is going to be probably where you're doing most of your styles creations. An example of this is, let's say you design a website, it looks beautiful, you picked the best green color in the world and you love it. You send it off to a client and they're like, I hate that green, but it's all over this website. If you created it as a style, you can just go into there and change it to what they want, and it'll change every element that you applied that style to. We'll play around with this more so you can see it visually, but just to know, it's pretty important that you know these things. So let's go ahead and create some of these. So let's create a text one first, and we're going to name this H1. An H1 is a HTML code tag for when you're developing websites. Is basically your page title. You can write that in description if you want to make sure that you remember what an H1 is. It's your page title. Under our properties, this is where we can change our text settings. It's pretty similar to like every other program like Word and Google Docs and stuff like that. So the nice thing with our fonts is that it is linked with Google Fonts, which is a great resource if you don't already know about it. So it's just fonts.google.com, and there is 18,000 around font families in here. These are all fully integrated into Figma. And so what I like to do when I'm trying to choose a font is I go around to my Google Fonts. I can play around with different feelings, like playful, find a font that I like, and I can just look up that name in Figma, and then it's already there. So you can either follow along directly with me with the ones I've chosen, or you can pick whichever fonts you want if you want to make this design your own. So I'm going to do one called Montserrat, that first one, Montserrat. Under where it says regular, this is going to be those settings like if you want them to be bolded or italicized, and you have all of those combinations. For our page title, I'm going to click the semi-bold one. Then where it says 12, this is your font size. So how big do you want it to be? They have like the presets over here, but you can also just click in here and type whichever size you want. I'm going to make mine nice and big. So I'm going to put 86 or 96, sorry. This one right here where it says auto is going to be your line height. So this is if you're going to have like a paragraph chunk of text that's multi-lines, how much distance do you want between each line of text? I'm just going to leave it at auto. And then this next one where it says 0% is your letter spacing. So in between each letter of every word, how much space do you want there to be? It might just take some time playing around with what looks good. And so I'm just going to click create style. And then I can see over here in my local styles, I have my new text style as well. All right. So let's add a color one so we can see what the color settings are. So click the create style and you can do color and you can name your color. So this could be like your branding name if you have like our digital lounge blue, for example. I could do it like that. For this one, I'm just going to name it text. I like to have pretty descriptive names for my styles so that I don't have to add a description, so that I know like this is going to be my text color that I'm using. Pretty simple properties down here. You have this color settings. If you click on that thumbnail, it brings up your color picker right here. So you have some options right here where it's a solid color. You can do a gradient, which we'll play around with probably next week. If you want it to be an image, it's a little weird that like images and videos are fills, so they're like colors kind of in Figma. But this is where you find them. You also have your slider wheel right here, and you can also use this eyedropper tool to pick up a color from somewhere else in your Figma document. So if you played around with an element and you just want to make sure that you're choosing the right color, you can do that. Where these letters and numbers are, this is what's called a hex code for a color. And this is just basically like if you want to make sure you're getting the exact color that you want. So for my text, I am going to do one that is 1D 1703. So 1D1703. Where you have this percentage, that's your opacity, so how colored in it is, how transparent, etc. But I'm good with this right now. So I just clicked over here into my pop-up to see that color, and then I can click create style. And so now I have my text style, my color style, and my grid styles over here. So you may be wondering, hey, you used Google Fonts for font choice. Did you use Figma for color choice? No, I did not, because I use something much simpler. Realtimecolors.com. So if you've been in a workshop with me before, I talk about this one in like every single workshop I do. Realtimecolors.com is one of my favorite sites because it allows you to see your color scheme on a live and functioning site before you go through the process of designing everything already. So I follow these stuff down here, these naming conventions, text, background, primary, secondary, accent. If you like the color, you can just click on that one down here and it'll show you that hex code, which is where I put it in over in Figma. My favorite thing, they do have a Figma plugin as well. We'll talk about plugins later today. My favorite thing is hitting this dice button or the space bar on your tab or on your keyboard, and it just randomizes your color scheme. So whenever I'm trying to decide a color scheme for something, I typically just open this and I hit spacebar a bunch of times until I find one that I like. Cool. So I am now going to give you another challenge with these styles. So I'm going to give you the challenge of creating some text styles and some color styles. So for text, I want you to name one H2. This is our subheadings. We're using that Montserrat medium at 48 points. We're also going to create a H3, which is our subheadings, where all of this is going to be the same, except it's going to be half the size, so 24. And then we are also going to create some body text. Instead of Montserrat, this is going to be Open Sans. It's going to be regular and at 16. I typically like to have bigger than 12-point font for websites and apps, just because 12-point font can be a little small on screens. I'll put the colors over here. So for colors, we're going to create a background color. I'll just do it like this, background FEFCF6. Our primary will be that. Our secondary will be 7 D77F3, and our accent will be F051DB. So as you're working on this, I will also work on this, but if you get stuck at any point, just let me know. A really quick way, just as you're doing this, we've already created a color style and a text style. So if you hover over text styles and you click the plus icon that appears, it'll just create a new text one and you don't have to go plus text again. But either one works. And I'm going to turn back on my layout so that we can actually start creating some stuff. So it's not just all me telling you that we're going to have things. So let's pretend that we're making a portfolio website for ourselves. And we like to have like a big thing at the top of our portfolio that says, hi, I'm insert your name here, so that people know who you are. So to add text, you can use this T icon down here. You can also put T on your keyboard, and that puts your text tool. And you can just click where you want to add text. So I'm going to do it within my home section, and I'm just going to put the words, hi, I'm Sean. You can put whatever you want for your title, though. Now, as I said before, as we have a text element selected now instead of a frame, we do have some more options over here in our design tab that are more related to text. As you're typing in a text box, you'll notice that my cursor is still at the end with that kind of flashing thing. That means that any kind of change that I make over here isn't actually going to be applied anywhere because I don't actually have text selected. I have like the very end of an empty part of a text box selected. So an easy way after you're done typing things to select the whole text box is just click outside of it. And then you get this blue kind of box around. And that just means that you've selected the whole text box, and any of these changes that you make over here in this design tab will be applied to all of the text within. So if you go in this design tab under typography, we have that same 4-square menu, where if you click on here, you will see all of those text styles that we created before. And so I can click there and click H1 because this is going to be my page title, and it'll show with that font styling that we created before. And then down here under fill, this is where you change that color styling. So right now it's set to full black, but if I click that 4-square menu, I get all of those colors styles that I created before, and I can pick my text one. It's the one that I chose is pretty close to black, it's just slightly off. So now that we have this text, I want you to add this is going to be your little challenge of adding a tagline for yourself below. So describe yourself a little bit. You can say you're, for example, like a multimedia journalist, specializing in geospatial data, or like whatever describes you, like your one phrase pitch to an employer. So just add that as a new text box underneath here because we're going to style it differently. So I'm going to add mine, hitting T on my keyboard, clicking underneath, and I'm going to start typing It's going to save my last style. So it's going to be my H1. So I'm just going to say this about myself. I'm going to click outside to make sure that I'm selecting the whole text box. And then over here under typography, I can see that my H1 style has been applied. I want to make this text different. So I'm going to unlink that H1 by clicking that paperclip icon that was right by it. And then here's a trick is if you have a style already created that you just want to kind of remix a little bit, change it a little bit, you can apply it. So I'm going to hit that 4-square menu, go to body and select that, but that's way too small. So what I'm going to do now is unlink that body style again. And then now I can make further changes. So here I'm going to change 16 to 36, let's say. All right. So that's some basic text stuff. But you'll notice with mine that my text boxes aren't aligned very well because I was just clicking in there and just adding. So you can select multiple elements in Figma by clicking on one, holding down the Shift key on your keyboard, and clicking on the other one. And this will select both layers of text, which we can see over here. And we have our position options over here. And so we have 2 selected, which it tells us. And these position buttons let us determine where we want them to be aligned in relation to each other. And so I can put this left one over here to make them aligned fully on the left. You can do the middle one to apply what's called the horizontal center, which looks from the left to the right and finds the center point of where they are. You can also do right here. And then here you have your vertical alignment, so up and down. So do you want them to align at the tops of them? Do you want them to align in the middle from top to bottom or at the bottom of them? Now I'm going to click the left one and I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to put Command plus to zoom in on my keyboard. If you're on Windows, it should be your Windows plus or your Control plus. Now to move over, because right now if I try to move with this, I'm selecting, so I can't get over. So there's 2 things you can do. You can switch to your hand tool with H or by opening this group and hitting that. What's more easy is with your move tool selected, holding down spacebar on your keyboard, and then you'll see this hand icon show up, and then you can click and drag to like pan around and move to a different area if you're zoomed in. Okay. Now, if I click on my headline again or my page title, you'll notice I still have those position options right here. When you only have one element selected, it's going to do the position in relation to its parent layer. So this is a little technical at times, but basically, if you look here under home and we're like opening and closing, those text things go away. That means our text is within our home frame. And so if I were to click on here and do align to the left, it's going to align to the left of my frame. If I do the center, it's going to align to the center of my frame. And the right is going to be where the right edge is on the right of the frame. But when you have multiple selected and you do that, it's in relation to each other. Okay, so now this is where I'm going to use my layout grid here. And I am going to first select my headline and just move it down. If you want to be careful of how you're moving it, you hold shift and then you can only move it in like one axis at a time. So if I was up here and I'm holding down shift, I can move it only down. Or if you really push your mouse or your trackpad, you can break that. But you do have to kind of like put the effort in to do that. But if you're just doing slight movements, it'll stay in line. So I'm just going to do it to where it looks pretty good. And this has like a little bit of a text box issue where like this H has a little bit more space than this A does, right? So sometimes the position stuff, you just have to eyeball it as well. So I'm just going to hold down shift and move it to the right a little bit so it aligns to the eye. Once you have these placed in relation to each other in a way that you really like, I highly recommend that you select both. So click one, shift, click the other, and do a Command or Control G on your keyboard. You can also right click and then go to the group selection tool. What this basically does is it makes our text layers be grouped together. So now as I move around them, they move together. So I positioned them in relation to each other in the way that I really liked it, and I didn't want that to change. I grouped them together, and now I can place them on our page. So I'm going to put it right by the second column, somewhere in the middle. And as you're right by that left edge of the column, you'll see that like orangish reddish line pop up, slightly pinkish. And that just basically means like, hey, it's right on that edge of the column. It's perfectly in line with that. And I can just place that right there. So place it how you would like. I did mine on the second column in on the first row that is not our navigation menu row. Okay. Are we all doing good still? Cool. So now we're going to play around with a little bit. I'm going to command minus to go back out. And you can use that hand tool again, that spacebar to move it to where you want. We're going to go through a concept called wireframing. Has anyone heard of that before? Okay, we got one. Cool. So wireframing is basically you make low fidelity representations of what you are going to eventually have. This is especially helpful for when you want to start designing, but you don't know the specific words you're going to use. You don't know the specific images or videos or stuff like that. You don't really play around with color too much just because it's not supposed to be too attention grabbing. And there's different ways that you can represent elements. The biggest one is going to be for images, which I'm going to show you how to create using some of our shape tools. So we're going to create these kind of project cards that show a thumbnail of our portfolio project and then like a title and stuff like that. So the first thing that I want to create is going to be that kind of card shape. You might see these in like on websites where it kind of looks like a bento box almost at times. So to use the rectangle tool, it is that one down here. If you've changed your shape tool, it might be underneath your grouping. You can also hit R on your keyboard. And let's create our image wireframe element. So I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit so it's a little bit better. So let's create an image that's going to span 4 columns and it's going to be 1 row. So if you kind of hover over where that is, and you can just click and drag with that rectangle tool to select it and create where you want it to be. Don't worry, you can edit it. So feel free to let go whenever you want. If you want to double make sure, just kind of move the corners around till you see those lines that show that you're on those column stuff. Okay, cool. We're almost done with our image wireframe. It's so simple. So the next thing that we need to do is show that it is actually an image. And the way to do this is to create 2 lines that cross through each other on top of this box. So this one has proved a little tricky at times to explain. So I will go a little slow doing it. If you click on the pen tool down here, it is also the P key on your keyboard. You will see this right here. And if you go up to like the top left, it doesn't have to be perfect, of your rectangle, and just click. Don't hold it down, just click. That'll start your line. And then without holding down, move your mouse or your trackpad, and you'll start to see this blue line that's showing where your line's going to go. So just go down to your bottom right and click there. Now you'll notice that it's going to try to keep us going with our line after we click. But if you just hit enter, you're good. And your line's done. Cool. How do we get along with that? All right. The biggest trick is don't hold it down. I think in other design tools, you might hold it down, but in this one, you don't. It creates some weird stuff. All right. Next challenge, create the other line. So go from the bottom left to the top right so that it creates an X. All right. So hopefully that was pretty simple. So this is going to be our image wireframe element. We're probably going to want to have multiple images. And so if you highlight everything, I'm going to click and drag with my select tool over all of that and do that Command or Control G again to create a group here. Now I have 2 groups, group 1 and group 2. I probably want them to be a little bit more descriptive. So I'm going to double click in group 1 and put this as page title, and double click in group 2 and put this as image wireframe. You can name it whatever you want, just so that you know what group is what. All right. So we're going to have multiple images across our site. And so you're going to want to have multiple of these if you're creating that wireframe. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can create a duplicate of this. One is your standard Command or Control C, Command or Control V to paste, and then you can just move it and you have your duplicate over there. I'm a big fan of simplifying things even more. So to create a duplicate in a bit of a quicker fashion, if you hold down the Option key, if you're on Mac, or the Alt key, if you're on Windows, and you hover over an element, you'll see that there's these two little icons, right? These two kind of select ones, one that's black and then one that's like outlined in black but white. If you click and drag, it's just going to create that duplicate already for you. And you don't have to hit Command C, Command V and move stuff around. So again, that's holding down Alt or Option on your keyboard, hovering over your element, and then clicking and dragging it to somewhere else where you want it to be. Now, with wireframing, you might not have the words all set up yet. You might have some. It's a good idea to try to get some so that you can get some representation of what it is. But in case if you just literally don't know what to put in, and you want to put that placeholder text, that Latin gibberish text, the lorem ipsum, blah, 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 blah. You can do that using what's called a plugin within Figma. And so what a plugin is essentially is that there's some tool that either Figma created or a third-party developer created that they didn't see in Figma and they wanted an easy way to do it. So in order to do plugins, you can right-click or control-click anywhere in Figma, and you'll see this plugins section. You can also go to the Figma menu up here and then find plugins right here. Then you probably only have manage plugins because you haven't used any yet. So you'll click manage plugins here, and there's a ton of plugins out there. You might just want to play around with some. But if you look up just the lorem ipsum, so it's just LOREM, and then you have this one right here. I think this is the one that I typically use. And so then you click on it, you can see a little bit more about it, and then you can click run. And this allows you to generate some placeholder text or images using a layer. So what I typically like to do is to create a text box. So click T, and then I click and drag it around to be the size of the text that I want it to be. And then in our lorem ipsum plugin, we have a couple options. We can generate a specific number of words or characters or paragraphs. We can also click auto generate, and that will just fill our text box with some text. So as you start playing around with stuff, and you can edit this text too, so click out of it, make it go to a smaller font, etc., and play around with that stuff. There. Okay. I have two more plugins I want to show you, and then we're going to create one of those project card stuff. So the first one, if you right click and go to plugins, you can also go to that Figma menu into plugins. You can click manage plugins because you'll need to add a new one. I already have it. It is called Iconify. So Iconify. We're not going to actually add anything from here. I just want to show it to you. So if you click on Iconify and you run it, you can search icons for really anything. So you can do home. If you want to see a bunch of different home icons that you can use in your design, you could search for, maybe there's like a contact me page. So you want to do like a phone. So you can look up all these phone icons. There is also a lot of logos as well. So if you wanted like in like a section to show like that Photoshop and you wanted the Photoshop logo to be there, if you look up Photoshop, you can see the Photoshop logos and also other icons that people made that look less like Photoshop. And so this is a good way to find icons, especially if you are not adept at creating your own icons. You can just find these and use these. The other plugin, which we are probably going to use a lot of, I would assume, if you right click, go to plugins, and you have to click manage plugins because you're adding it for the first time, but it's called Unsplash. Has anyone heard of Unsplash before? I think I got one nod. So Unsplash is a really great resource that has a bunch of free and some paid images that you can use. Basically, all of the free ones. So if I click presets and let's say I go to like nature. I don't know. Oh, it just created one for me. You can also search, and if you click search, let's say, and go to like interior, you can see all of these images of interior. You can also search for different things. Anything that doesn't have unlock by it, so all of these ones right here, for example, these are basically pictures that professional photographers took and donated to Unsplash that you can use in your projects. You can even make money off of these projects that use these images that use this Unsplash license. It's basically like a, hey, like just create stuff. They do typically ask that you like credit them, saying like, hey, I got this on Unsplash with this person, but you don't have to pay any licensing fees to use those free images from Unsplash. Okay. Any questions about these three plugins or just plugins in general? Okay, cool. So we've done very basic design stuff. I want to do something that you actually might think is cool now. So let me just get rid of this accidental image. So I'm going to go over here to my About Me page just because it's blank. So we're starting from scratch. So we're going to have multiple projects on our portfolio site, as you probably would. And so what I'm looking for us to have is these like three cards side by side where it shows our projects in almost that bento box type style. They have a image that stretches to here, and then it has like a text, a short description, and a view project button. Okay, so this is gonna be maybe a little challenging. I think we've set you up pretty good for doing this though. So I'm gonna zoom in, and I'm gonna first create the background of my card over here. So I'm gonna use the R on my keyboard. You can also just click on the rectangle tool. And I'm gonna click and drag to make it 4 columns wide and 2 rows tall. So it looks something like this. You can obviously create whatever size you would like. So I'm gonna create that there. Now you might have noticed as we created those image wireframe stuff, as you hover over a rectangle, in each of these corners, you get these circles, right? So this is what is called the corner radius. And this is basically the value of how rounded your corners are. So as you create a rectangle, they are sharp edges, 90 degrees. And if you want to create a more rounded effect so that it looks a little bit more modern, you can change that here. So you can just click and drag on one of them and it'll move all of them for you. So that is one way that you can create that roundedness effect in a shape. So again, that's just this circle right here. Additionally, if you have your rectangle selected, over here in your design tab, you can also change it here. It's under appearance and this like arc icon over here. You can either type in a specific number or you can click on the icon and drag it from right to left to change it as well. Cool. So I'm going to set mine to like, let's do 25. So it's like slightly rounded, but not too bad. I'm going to click on About Me. This is something I forgot to do before. So click on About Me up here. You can also just click on the frame. And where it says Fill down here in the Design tab, I'm going to click on that 4 square menu again and apply my background color so that I'm actually using the background color I set before. So I just clicked on the frame name, went over to fill. There's that 4 icons by the plus, and then I picked the background color that I set up before. All right, so for this one, I'm going to select with About Me selected, I am going to turn off my layout grid over here, just because I want to see the color of this against my background to make sure it's something that I like. So I'm going to select my background or my rectangle, and with the same place with fill, I'm going to select that 4 button menu, and I have primary, secondary, and accent. I'm going to try primary. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So I like the color, so I'm going to turn back on my layout grid. So as I'm putting something in here. So now I need to put an image in here. I obviously don't have an image of my imaginary project that I did not create or do anything with yet. So we're going to put a placeholder image in there from our handy dandy Unsplash. So right click anywhere, go to plugins. You might be a little careful if you right click on your rectangle, it might just change your rectangle for the image. So maybe right click on your frame. go to plugins and go to Unsplash and search for some sort of image that you want to put in there. Typically, when I pick placeholder images, I don't know if this is just like a personal preference or if most people do it. I click the abstract category and I just find something like this. Something that looks kind of cool, a little, not, I avoid putting people. It's a little awkward sometimes. But so I'm just gonna find one that I like. Let's choose, this one's kind of cool. It's like a little blurry and stuff. So I'm just gonna click and drag to move it over. And now click on the image and I'm gonna move over and arrange it over. But you'll notice as I'm trying to put stuff around, that it's not actually like showing me those lines anymore, right? And that's because if I look over here on my layers panel, my image right here is not within my About Me frame. So it's not actually referring to that frame or any of its content at all. So if I click and drag to move it into the About Me, so you can either click and hold over the title or go down into here. That just means that it's now in there and I can start to see that alignment a little bit better. So again, that was just clicking and dragging my layer over here. Cool. All right. So I'm going to use my hand tool. Again, that's the shift and clicking and moving. I'm going to use this one to resize it to over here. So it's just this corner and you can move it over there. And I'm going to move this back over there. So now I have my image that's spanning my 4 columns and my 1 row. So I'm gonna turn off my layout grid yet again, just so that you can see this a little bit better. But you'll notice something's a little strange, right? So we have our image that is a box. And with our rectangle, if I move that up, you'll see that there's this clipping thing happening right here, where I have my rounded rectangle, but my image isn't actually rounded at all. And so that loses that effect when the image is on top, where now it looks like it has a sharp top edges and some rounded ones here. So if I click on there, I could easily change this, right? But the issue is that it also changes down here. So that's maybe not something you want for your design. So if I undo that with my image selected over here in the design tab under appearance, right by where we changed that corner radius, there's this kind of rectangle square type button that only has corners drawn on. And this is our individual corners. So if you click on that one, you will get your options to change each corner individually. So this is helpful in this case where we only want to change the top 2, but not the bottom 2. And so I'm just going to match the same setting I used before. So the top one I'm going to put to 25 and the top left and the top right, I'm going to set to 25 each. And I'll enter. And then now I get that cool rounded image up here, but it is still sharp down here. Cool. Any questions about that? Cool. Now, for those of you who know a little bit of Photoshop, Figma can also do some basic photo editing. So if you click on your image, over down here in your fill, remember it uses images as color fills in a sense. If you click on that thumbnail or where it says image, you'll get your image editing kind of menu with all of your basic kind of image adjustments that you can do. So exposure, saturation, tint, etc. I'm not going to go through these, but you can do on any of those to change stuff like that. There is also this drop icon up here, and this is where your blend modes are. And so this basically determines how this layer that you've selected, how it blends with the layer that's below it. So if I were to do something like lighten or screen, it kind of uses that yellow color of that rectangle below it in some sort of blending way. Usually when you're doing mockups, you don't have to do much image editing. Additionally, all of the image editing is what is called global editing. So anything that you do will apply to everything on this image. But let's say like you just want to change like this kind of tealy blue type color in the middle. Something like Photoshop would be much better for doing that. But if you do decide to kind of remix something from Unsplash, they do just have like a full website that you can create an account from and download images directly from. So it's not like exclusively a Figma thing. Okay, so now I think this might be your last challenge for this workshop series. I want you to And you can use plugins, you can use your own text, you can do whatever. In this section of your rectangle, this second row, I want you to add like a placeholder project name, a placeholder project description, and I want you to take a stab at creating a button without me telling you how. It's pretty simple. You're using a rectangle. You can round out the corners to make it a little bit more round, and you place some text on top of it. And you can do some positioning stuff. So I'm going to give you that challenge. I'll give you about 5 minutes to test it out, and then I'll show you how I do it. Right, I know it hasn't been 5 minutes, but I'm gonna go through it just so we can show off some other cool things in the last minutes. So I'm gonna hit T, I'm gonna click, I'm just gonna put some placeholder text, I'm just gonna put project one name. I click outside. I'm going to apply my H3 style right here. So click that. I'm gonna move that over. I'm gonna have it, it's a little bit of a funny thing. I'm gonna put it where it's the right side is on the right side of that second column, just so that there's still some space in between that text and the rest of this card. Then I have my description section. So I'm just going to select my text box area where I want it to be, right click, and I think it went away. I should have done the plugin first. So I'm going to do my lorem ipsum. My text box is going to be like right here. I'm going to generate 5 sentences, and I am going to apply my body text styling there. And it did not apply because I didn't move my cursor. So just a reminder to do that. So change it to the body, and then I'm just going to delete a bunch of this extra stuff. If I want to position them perfectly, I can select both, click one, shift click the other, and then use my align to the left to make sure that they're in line with each other. And then for my project button, so click to view kind of thing, I am going to create a button that uses this rectangle that goes across. I'm going to change the fill to maybe like the accent color. Upon putting these colors together, it is not a great cohesive color scheme. It's a little jarring, but then I'm going to place text in here, and I'm going to put view project. It's going to automatically try to make it white for me so that it looks a little bit better, which is greatly appreciated. I'm going to unlink so that I can do something like semi-bold and make it a little bit bigger. Select both of these, align both their horizontal centers and their vertical centers over here so that they're perfectly centered in every way. While they're both still selected, I'm Command G-ing to group them into my view project button. And then when you have a group, you can still edit those individual elements by either double clicking inside so that you can click into a rectangle or the text, or you can also click on them individually over here in the layers. And then I am just going to make some of these rounded corners so that it looks a little bit better. And I turned it off. And so you should maybe have a project card that looks something like this. And I might play around with some of that sizing so that it looks a little bit more in line, even if it goes off of my grid a little bit. How was that? Were people able to do something similar? Cool. So I want to show you a little bit of the Figma community really quickly, and then I'll do a little poll so that we can see what maybe will work best for next week. So if you click on this Figma icon over here, and you can do back to files. Back here in our main tab, if you click on Explore Community, this is that community where people place so many different files and assets and icon packs and UI kits and design systems and whatever you may need. And so if I scroll down, you'll see people have like an iOS 15 UI kit, an iOS 16, and stuff like that. I can also search, if I just search like Apple, for example, I will see a Mac OS Sequoia UI kit. So this is actually made directly by Apple, which is pretty cool. So if you click on it and you click open in Figma, you'll get, I've already opened this, but when you do it, you'll get some warning that's like, hey, you can use this UI kit, but only for products that are exclusive to Apple kind of thing. If you're just playing around, just accept it. You'll be fine. So here you can see some of those pages that we talked about before where it says some getting started stuff. some change log, there's some examples. So if I click on, if I scroll down actually in the pages and I pick like desktop template, I can see like a template of like how a Mac OS Sequoia thing is. If I go down, if I find the components one, we'll go through components next week for sure. And if I scroll and I find something like this is that toolbar at the top right here. So if I just copy this and then I go back to my Figma file, so the spring 2025, and I paste, I can like input a UI kit that shows a like Apple toolbar. It has a bunch of placeholder stuff. You can actually go in and change it. So if you don't want it to say item, you can change it to something else. It does, I don't have this font, so you can just select the font that you want to replace it with. I find that Arial works pretty good for it. And then you click replace on the whole page, and then you can close, and then you can double click in here. If you actually do it, it looks like I didn't do it. If you confirm it and you click in there, you can change it from file to like edit or Chrome, or you can put your name or stuff like that. Explore the community, see what else is there. People put a bunch of icons up there. If you're making like a mock thing of like a data dashboard, but you don't want to have to go through and build like a fake data stuff, there's a bunch of things out there as well that you can use. If you want to see how it would look like with a real computer or something, if you click on the frame name and you go over into the prototype settings, or you can actually just click plus, you will see just like what the screen looks like. But you can also change when you click show prototype settings, where it says no device, you change it to whatever device you want it to be. So I could do like a MacBook Pro 16-inch. I can choose the color. Don't know why this is special, but you can, if you have a silver one or a space gray one and you want it to be exactly what it is, you can do that. And then also change the background color of that prototype. And then now, as you go and you see it, you will kind of see it on a mock thing. We haven't sized it correctly for the screen, but you can kind of see it on a fake laptop.